Country, my damn country. Don't mean it, don't need to don't pass the test. You ain't never cheated or been cheated on. The take off.
That's Roy Nelson, ladies and gentlemen.
Roy Nelson might not be what you expect when you think of an elite UFC athlete.
I think he's an incredibly tough guy with his physique and everything. I'm blown away how he can compete at this level.
His heavy build and Duck Dynasty appearance is disarming to say the least. But don't be fooled. Behind his unassuming exterior lies one of the most prolific knockout artists in the UFC's history, with one of the best chins in the game.
And boom!
This is the story of Roy Big Country Nelson. As a pioneer of mixed martial arts, Roy Big Country Nelson began his fighting career in 2004. To put this into perspective, Dana White had only bought the UFC a few years prior, and The Ultimate Fighter didn't even exist yet. Despite being known later in life as one of the hardest punchers in history, Roy was initially known for his dangerous ground game. MMA was still in its infancy in the early 2000s, and many heavyweights couldn't compete with the ADCC black belt. It wouldn't be until Big Country found his way to the International Fight League that glimpses of that legendary power became apparent.
What's up, boys?
With the success of the first few seasons of The Ultimate Fighter, getting onto the reality TV show was quickly becoming one of the most popular ways to punch one's ticket into the UFC. The chance to not only learn from world-class coaches, but also self-promote on national television was too good of an opportunity for most regional fighters to pass up, including Roy.
There was a whole reason why I did The Ultimate Fighter. It was because there was longevity in the scheme of things, the PR, because up until season 10, they never cut a Ultimate Fighter winner.
However, it would be on this season of The Ultimate Fighter that would match Nelson up with his career-long nemesis, Dana White.
Roy Nelson is a tough, durable heavyweight. He's got an incredible chin. He's got knockout power and world-class jiu-jitsu. But he is an absolute pain in the ass.
That's Roy's deal, between him and Dana. If you can't get along with Dana, you're in trouble.
Despite the success of the earlier seasons of The Ultimate Fighter, viewership had been dropping recently, and Dana's answer was to bring in the notorious street fighter Kimbo Slice.
What's up, Kimbo?
Kimbo had built himself a significant following online with his aggressive come-forward style in bare-knuckle street fights, and Dana wanted to see if this translated into increased viewers for his show.
I knew that Kimbo would bring a lot to the show.
When the fight between Roy and Slice was set in place, you could be forgiven for thinking Slice would win, based on the appearances alone. But those familiar with Nelson before The Ultimate Fighter knew this was a mismatch.
They paired him up with the guy who was a former world champion, over 30 fights, black belt in jiu-jitsu. Just a nightmare for Kimbo. He didn't have a prayer to fight.
Big Country had already faced staples of the UFC heavyweight division, such as Andrei Arlovsky, Jeff Monson, and Ben Rothwell, and already had over 15 professional fights. And it showed.
I need work, Kimbo. Stop.
After abruptly crushing Dana's hopes of Kimbo going all the way, Nelson secured himself a place in the Ultimate Fighter final, after overcoming Justin Wren in a decision and knocking out James McSweeney. Now just one fight away from a guaranteed spot on the UFC roster, Roy was matched up with the now infamous comedian Brandon Schaub, who, despite being considered by far the better athlete, was left reaching for answers against Big Country.
You're funny. You should be a comedian.
Oh, that was stupid. Now I'm stuck in the stupid contract.
For his UFC debut, he took out the skyscraper, Stefan Struve, despite looking like he wouldn't even be able to reach the giant's chin in the stare-downs.
Boom, and there it is. Just like that. Big Country looking to finish his fight. Struve trying to protect himself. Nope. That's it. It is all over.
But the ascent to the top wouldn't be a slow one for Roy. His next two fights were against former UFC champions, Frank Mir and Junior Dos Santos. And following the losses, Dana seemed to forget he was actually supposed to be Nelson's promoter.
Seriously, who would want to put their... Somebody's going to want to put their company logo on that?
Although he had dropped his first two UFC fights, Nelson eventually found his feet and got right back to business.
Pace here early. That's a big right hand. Go Croca.
Stop, let's
It is all over.
And after a close decision with Fabricio Verdun, Big Country went on a legendary string of first-round knockouts. David Herman may have been in better shape, but it didn't matter.
With the big right hand, and it is all over.
Matt Mitrione played in the NFL, and it didn't matter.
That kick. Oh! Big Country! Big Country! And it's all over!
Czech Congo looked like he belonged on Mount Olympus, and even that didn't matter.
Against the cage either.
Oh! Big shot! Just like that!
During this time, Big Country amassed a cult-like following, inspiring all those who felt like they had been underestimated, and reminding us all that there's a lot more to fighting than simply looking the part.
I think people are always looking at the wrong thing. Like, nobody looks at my legs. Like, I got legs. I got, my muscles on my legs. I'll put that up against any bodybuilder.
Now at the peak of his prime and popularity, it was time for Roy to be reintroduced to the top of the division. Unfortunately, he yet again wasn't able to break into the top 5.
You know what I mean? You get him above number 5, he doesn't look like he belongs in the top 10. You get him in there with some guys that aren't, and he looks like a world beater.
And in a way, Dana was right. Roy just couldn't seem to get ahead of the Stipes and the DCs of the world. But that doesn't make him average. When he wasn't fighting the all-time greats of the division, Nelson was as deadly as ever.
Job of, oh, that's gonna be it! It is indeed!
He had plates, but I broke my hand with him. The UFC wanted me to fight Mark Hunt. And I'm like, well, I got pins still in my hand, like they're still cast up pins. And I'm like, I'll take the fight,
But no matter how hard you hit or how good your chin might be, there's always someone bigger and badder.
Continuing to smash uppercut. Look at that. Right hand. Carlos in all sorts of trouble. That's it.
And after years of proving that big muscles don't mean anything, it was somewhat poetic that fellow XXLer Mark Hunt would finally be the one to crack Nelson's chin.
For a couple years now where, that's it!
Oh my! It is all over!
Never done
Mark
before!
Hunt by knockout!
Now 47 years old, it was safe to say that Big Country's prime was far behind him. His glory days in the UFC were over, going 2-4 in his remaining UFC fights, 1-6 in Bellator, and recently, in his late 40s, has gone 1-1 in bare-knuckle MMA. If you only started watching mixed martial arts at the peak of the McGregor era, you could be forgiven for thinking of Roy Nelson as an overweight journeyman, a relic of a bygone era, or a curious novelty.
I try to finish my fights. Like, it doesn't matter what round it is, I'm going to try to finish my fight.
But for those who witnessed the prime of Big Country for themselves, he meant so much more.
He is 50 pounds overweight, and he's a world-class athlete. I mean, you cannot say that Roy Nelson is not a world-class fighter. He's absolutely a world-class fighter.
The only thing we love more than a success story is an underdog story. And who embodied the underdog better than Roy Nelson? His appearance was weaponized against him, and despite not being marketable to the UFC higher-ups, he proved all of them wrong.
Their misconceptions would be that I don't train, which is okay too, because if I don't train, I'm just awesome at what I do without training.
He campaigned for better fighter pay, less coercive contracts, and stricter drug testing.
Fighters fighting in the UFC for free, bro.
Stop.
No, real talk. I've heard it. I don't know how true it is.
It's called Ultimate Fighter. And you're like, man, this is rocks. You know what? I'm a professional fighter. I make $80,000 a year.
And despite being ridiculed and labeled an idiot, he stuck to his principles and never stopped advocating for those things. In a world that told him to be thin, clean-shaven, and fit by any means necessary, Roy represents those among us who reject these norms and tread the path less traveled, even to his own detriment. Dana said Nelson couldn't make it in this business, that he would never be a champion or a fan favorite. But so long as those who remember his jaw-dropping performances keep his legacy intact, no number of losses in his 40s will ever erase the legend that is Roy Big Country Nelson.